Good Friday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, inching backward, a COVID setback on this Friday morning as the Delta variant continues to wreak havoc across the country. America's largest county, Los Angeles, reinstating its mask mandate while indoors, regardless of your vaccination status. This as the FDA reveals an updated timeline on the vaccine for children 12 and under. We've got the latest on the coronavirus. Fight for justice. Arrests on Capitol Hill as the battle over voting rights in our nation's capital heats up. The head of the Congressional Black Caucus, among others, taken into custody following a protest of the Republican filibuster as those Texas lawmakers in D.C. sit down with Senator Joe Manchin. We'll take you inside that meeting. Hearing their case, a major reversal of a Trump-era immigration policy, now barring judges from closing cases they deem as low priority. What the ruling means for the ballooning backlog of asylum cases. And there is the love. Black Eyed Peas frontman will.i.am is giving back to the Los Angeles neighborhood where he grew up. One high-octane school robotics competition at a time. We'll give you a crash course on this investment in thousands of LA students as they put the pedal to the metal. That is such a fun story.
I know, that's cool. I wish when I was younger I could have built. I would have been horrible at building robots, but it would have been fun.
Yeah, for me, we did rubber band race cars, which my dad helped me out on a lot more than he probably should have. Yeah, we actually won.
Oh.
I think it's still in the case at my high school. Not as cool as robotics, so we'll get to that later, though. We start with COVID as cases climb and vaccination numbers fall. The nation's largest county is now bringing back a major restriction.
Starting this Sunday, people in Los Angeles County will have to wear masks indoors, even if they're vaccinated. Health officials are tying this new rule to the rise in cases. It is clear the Delta variant is now a nationwide challenge. The most recent CDC numbers show nearly 60% of all new COVID cases are coming from this strain. NBC News health and medical reporter Erica Edwards is following the latest on the pandemic again for us this morning. So, Erica, throughout the pandemic, LA has been one of the first places to implement restrictions, one of the last to remove them. So maybe this isn't terribly shocking, but what more can you tell us about this new mask mandate for LA and really the state of the Delta variant and COVID cases there?
Hey, Joe, good morning. That mask mandate goes back into effect this Sunday morning. The announcement follows 6 straight days of more than 1,000 new COVID-19 cases per day in LA County. Just yesterday, that number was more than 1,500. That's the highest it's been since March. Now, just yesterday, during a news conference on Thursday, the Los Angeles County health officer said this is an all-hands-on-deck moment.
Wearing a mask when indoors with others reduces the risk of getting and transmitting the virus. Masking indoors must again become a normal practice by all, regardless of vaccination status, so that we can stop the trends and level of transmission we're currently seeing.
The vast majority of COVID-19 cases, of serious COVID-19 cases, still remain among those who are unvaccinated, Joe.
So, Erica, the variant's getting a chance to spread more because of a lag in vaccinations, especially in certain parts of the country. What are federal health officials saying about this right now?
Right. So because the Delta variant spreads so easily, actively seeks out those who are most vulnerable to infection. That is, those who remain unvaccinated. And getting that second dose of vaccine seems to be really important in stopping the spread of the Delta variant. Now, last night, the head of the CDC, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, spoke with our colleague Lester Holt about the situation. She said the CDC is actively reaching out to areas of the country with high transmission and low vaccination rates to encourage those shots.
We knew that this was going to be harder as time went on. Places with low rates of vaccination are actually seeing more disease, and we're really trying to go there now to say, please, we don't want to hit that worst case scenario.
Dr. Walensky stressed one more time that the vaccines are highly effective in preventing the most serious forms of the illness, including hospitalization and death. Joe?
Yeah, and Erica, speaking of vaccines, we now have an idea of when kids under 12 might be eligible for the vaccine. When could that happen?
So Pfizer is still aiming to release its data on the ages 6 to 11 sometime in September. As for Moderna, they're expecting data on that age group sometime later this fall. Based on that timeline, it's going to take the FDA then a while to sift through all of those documents. The agency actually has asked for more follow-up safety data for kids than it did for adults. Yesterday, an FDA official told me that they suspect potentially a midwinter vaccine if all goes well. Now, the data on babies and toddlers is expected after that, more like October, November, putting a potential vaccine for that youngest age group further into 2022.
Well into next school year. All right, Erica, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
In Mississippi, the virus is spreading through that population once thought to be relatively safe. Children, currently 7 kids in the state's only children's hospital, are in the ICU with COVID. And 2 of them are actually on ventilators. The highly contagious Delta variant is tearing through communities with low vaccination rates. And as you can see on this map, Mississippi and Alabama rank 49th and 50th nationwide in getting people shots. Parents have until Monday to start vaccinating their children, 12 and up, of course, to make it in time for back to school. NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber joins us now from outside Children's of Mississippi in Jackson. Ellison, good morning. So first, just tell us about these 7 children. I mean, it's a relatively low number. We got to keep that context, but 2 of them are on ventilators. How are they doing and how are they being treated?
Yeah, and sort of the way to look at those numbers is kind of what percentage of total COVID patients hospitalized are they making up. At this hospital, they have 5 children that are hospitalized right now, needing intensive care because of COVID-19. You had Mississippi State Health Director warning people that there were 7 children in intensive care, 2 of them on ventilators statewide, again, all because of COVID-19. And when you look at the number of people who are hospitalized and intensive care because of COVID-19, that number, 7 children, that means that they make up approximately 7% of people hospitalized in intensive care because of COVID-19 in the state of Mississippi. And that is relevant because at this hospital, they say that that is a percentage that is higher than what they saw last summer when they were really at the peak of this pandemic. So in that context, they say it's really concerning. This children's hospital, it is the only children's hospital in the state of Mississippi, but it is part of a larger medical system here. It's one of the largest hospitals in Mississippi, University of Mississippi Medical Center. And they have, other hospitals as well. And they say that they have seen an uptick in patients they are treating because of COVID-19 just across the board. When you look at the numbers here in Mississippi, hospitalization rates have steadily increased since the beginning of July. And in the last week and a half, the number of patients in intensive care units because of COVID-19 has nearly doubled. Doctors here are begging people to get vaccinated because in this state, most people have not. Listen here.
I recognize that people don't like being told what to do, but we also, as a society, are told what to do for a lot of things. We pay taxes. We have to get vaccines before we go to school. We have to get car tags. So there are a lot of things that we're used to doing because we know we have to do. And this, to me, is more about responsibility for society.
And what's significant, too, about the number of children in this particular hospital is that all of them are under the age of 12, which would mean that they are not eligible to get vaccinated right now. And when I ask doctors, how do you make sure that that age group in particular stays protected? They say the answer is that when they're they're inside around other children, other adults, they're wearing face masks, and that the adults and teens who are eligible to get vaccinated around them are vaccinated. So it creates a bubble to keep them protected as well. Savannah?
Yeah, that might be a pretty good indicator of what we're looking at come school year is still wearing masks for children in classrooms. Ellison, it strikes me there that doctor that you were just talking to, Dr. Jones, that we heard from, he said people don't like to be told what to do. And I kind of wonder just if that has anything to do with the lack of vaccination in that state. I mean, it's next to last in the nation for vaccination rates. What are medical professionals trying to do about that?
Yeah, well, when I was talking to these doctors, and we spoke to 3 different doctors, including the head of the pediatric unit here, and they all talked about how frustrating it was. One said that she feels like people are referring and deferring to Facebook posts instead of doctors, people who normally they trust to treat cancer, to tell them what vaccines they need for their children to go to school, and to treat any serious illness that they have. But for whatever reason, they're not trusting them here. And they said it is really, really frustrating because they are trying to combat just a sea of misinformation, and they're doing the best they can. but it constantly keeps coming up. And they say there's some disconnect here that they honestly are having trouble reconciling as to why people are choosing to trust what they see on Facebook over doctors who are from Mississippi, live in Mississippi, raise their children in Mississippi, and who are normally people they trust for other advice on health issues, why they're not listening to them here. So what they're doing is they're just trying to get the message out again and again. But these vaccines, they are available and they are widely accessible at this point. Savannah?
Yeah, Allison, actually, a warning we heard from the Surgeon General yesterday about misinformation, particularly spreading on platforms like Facebook. Allison Barber, thank you so much. Now to the fight over voting rights on Capitol Hill. Texas legislators are continuing their whirlwind tour, meeting with senators in Washington to advocate for federal voting rights. Washington was the scene of a voting rights protest Thursday, where 9 people were arrested, including the Democratic representative who chairs the Congressional Black Caucus. We have a team lined up to cover every angle. NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson is at the Texas State Capitol in Austin. Correspondent Leanne Caldwell is in Washington. Hi there. Good morning to you both. Leanne, I'll start with you. So just first, tell us more about the protest on Capitol Hill. What exactly were the activists protesting? What were they saying? What were they asking for? And tell us about these arrests, who was arrested, and what ultimately led to that.
Good morning, Savannah. So this was a day of protest in favor of voting rights. So this is part of a larger action over the past weeks and months, really, to try to force the Senate to take up voting rights legislation. Of course, they did last month, but it was blocked by Republicans. And so activists aren't going to stop. This is coordinated with the Texas Democratic lawmakers who are here in Washington to lobby members of Congress. Now, 9 people were arrested yesterday. They protested in the atrium of one of the Senate office buildings, which is illegal to protest there. So Capitol Police said that they gave them 3 warnings, and then finally they had to escort them out in handcuffs. But these activists say that they are not going to back down and that they're going to continue to pressure the Senate to act. Savannah.
Priscilla, the Texas Democrats have had a whirlwind week in D.C. Give us a quick recap of what's happened and also tell us how did their meeting with Senator Manchin go yesterday? Because let's be honest, he's really the key to a lot of things they want.
Right, Joe, that was a very important meeting to them yesterday. And we know that everyone in that meeting appeared to be in agreement that something needs to happen on voting rights and some sort of legislation. And what they agreed on is that it may need to be a more narrow focus than what those Texas Democrats were originally lobbying for, which was the For the People Act or the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Another thing that we know did not come up in that conversation is the filibuster. Texas Democrats effectively said that plenty of people are talking with Senator Joe Manchin about the filibuster. And while they had mentioned the possibility of a carve out or even eliminating the filibuster altogether, they decided it was best for that conversation to focus on the things that they could come to an agreement to. The big question now, though, is timing. When might there be movement on this? Because, of course, Democrats are going to have to come back here at some point to likely vote on these bills. Joe, Savannah?
Now, Priscilla, we've talked a lot about these Democratic senators from Texas who came to D.C. this week, the dramatic fashion in which they left on these charter jets. But actually, they didn't all leave. And I know you spoke to some Democratic lawmakers there in Austin who decided to stay in the state of Texas. What'd they tell you?
Yeah, we spoke with Representative Eddie Morales. He represents a number of communities along the U.S.-Mexico border here. And what he said is that while he does not support this voting legislation that would be more restrictive, and he supports his colleagues who are in Washington, D.C., he made a promise to his constituents to work across the aisle. And so he stayed to do that and to foster bipartisanship, but also to keep an eye on what was going to be happening here at the state capitol while his colleagues were away. Take a listen to a little bit of our conversation.
I made clear that I was very supportive, and just everyone fights a different way. And my way of fighting was to stay on the House floor and make sure that no shenanigans took place. As some tried, they try to strip some of the committee some of the representatives in their committee memberships, their titles, and they wanted to assess penalties also, but we were able to stop that.
And while Republicans were unable to strip committee leaders of their titles, the Speaker of the House yesterday did remove the Speaker pro tem, Democratic Representative Joe Moody, from his position, something that the Speaker has the power to do under House rules. Savannah, Joe.
Leanne, switching gears, I want to ask you about the infrastructure plans on the Hill. We know Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer set an aggressive timeline for both the bipartisan and the Democrats-only plans. So Republicans are pushing back because the bipartisan bill isn't even done yet. What's Schumer's goal here?
Schumer has a bit of a problem, and that is time. Most people think, wait, it's only July. There's a lot of time left in the rest of the year, but legislatively there is not. Congress is out for most of August to meet with their constituents, to campaign. The end of September, there's a rush of funding bills to fund the government. So they have a lot of things to do between now and the end of the year. And let's face it, the closer you get to an election, the harder it is to pass legislation. And Schumer is very aware of this. It takes a lot of time to pass one piece of legislation on the Senate floor. And he knows this, so he's trying to put pressure on these lawmakers to wrap up their negotiations so they can get moving on actually voting on it.
All right, Leanne, thank you so much. And Priscilla, who's been up before the sun for like the whole week for us, thank you so much for your great reporting down there.
Rescue efforts in Germany are continuing after flash floods left villages underwater. More than 100 people are dead. Another 1,300 are unaccounted for. Officials say the country hasn't seen this kind of rainfall in more than a century. Sky News' Michelle Clifford reports.
In Western Germany, the army have been brought in to deal with the aftermath of the devastating floods. Residents in Hagen forced to flee their homes after the River Volm burst its banks.
Oh my God!
The sheer force of the floods swept away anything in their path. In Altena, locals watched on, unable to do anything as floodwaters streamed down their streets.
Oh nein!
The village of Schuld is among the hardest hit. Several homes have collapsed here, and the village is among many with no power and very difficult to access.
Overnight they were upstairs and it was dark because there was no light, no power.
Chancellor Angela Merkel, on a farewell visit to Joe Biden in Washington, described the situation as a catastrophe.
Ich traue die in dieser Katastrophe ihr Leben verloren haben.
I grieve for those who have lost their lives in this disaster. We still don't know the number, but it will be many. Some in the basements of their homes, some as firefighters were trying to bring others to safety. And to their loved ones, my deepest sympathies.
Tief empfundene Anteilnahme.
Across Europe, record rainfall has caused some of the worst flooding in decades. In eastern Belgium, rivers burst their banks and cascaded through towns and cities. Homes and livelihoods destroyed in an instant.
Luckily, I have my sister, but now we've been told that our house could collapse, and so we've had to leave.
In Pepinster, some residents had to be rescued on the back of trucks. Much of the town of Valkenburg in southeast Netherlands has been left underwater too. Homes and businesses inundated, and the fear remains of more rain in the coming days. In Turkey, a major rescue operation is underway after flash floods and landslides in the Black Sea province of Rize. Authorities say many villages are cut off and impossible to reach. And the Swiss city of Lucerne is on high alert, with its lake just centimetres from bursting its banks. Sandbags and inflatable flood barriers are being put in place as the water continues to rise.
The reason for the installation of the inflatable flood barriers was that some forecasts said that the lake level is going to continue to rise and that the magic limit will be reached.
In many parts of Western Germany, rescue services are still searching for those missing, feared swept away by the floods. And the rescue work continues as the rain keeps falling. Michelle Clifford, Sky News, Germany.
Just devastating images out of Germany. We do want to get a check on what's happening here in the U.S. The Morning News Now weather.
Yeah, hi, Bill. What an intro yet again. All this, it's crazy. Yeah. Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, that video looked like tsunami video or like the aftermath of like a huge storm surge from a hurricane. I mean, we were able to throw one weather graphic together to kind of show you what happened to this region here in northern Germany. So it was a cutoff low pressure. So the storm system was very slow moving. And if you look at the Cologne area, that's where the horrific flooding was. That's where you saw those pictures of those villages. The rain just didn't stop. I mean, it was just endless and hard, too. So just a horrible recipe. So let's bring it back to the lower 48 and show you the worst weather that we have in our country. Nothing compared to that. We don't have any horrific flooding, but we do have a lot of heavy rain over Missouri. If you're driving Interstate 44 through the Springfield area up to St. Louis, it's rainy. And Interstate 70 is not a fun ride this morning either, from St. Louis to Indianapolis and eventually into Ohio. So we're going to track this rain, and guess where it's heading for the weekend? That's right. It's heading for the East Coast again. Woo! All right. So then as we go throughout the Saturday forecast, Saturday morning actually starts out okay. The exception being Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse area, chance for some heavy rain. The eastern seaboard should be okay Saturday morning. If you have any plans, do it quickly, because by the afternoon and evening, thunderstorms widespread all through the region, and that will be a repeat on Sunday. So the heaviest rains, if we're going to get any flash flooding, possibility watch out in Indiana, also Ohio, western New York, and possibility of areas of central New England too. So here's the forecast for today, guys. It's warm, it's hot in the west, big shocker there, and it's going to be a very hot weekend in the interior west. Next hour, I'll have your complete weekend forecast for you, and I know you guys are going to love Sunday. It just looks absolutely perfect for a duck.
I was like, wait, what? That's what you just said.
Looking forward to that, Bill. Thank you.
See you soon.
Coming up, a major reversal of one Trump-era immigration policy.
And how it could affect pending asylum cases in the courts. That's next.
A new Justice Department order could cut down on the massive backlog of immigration cases. Attorney General Merrick Garland reversed a controversial Trump-era policy. He will now allow immigration judges to effectively pause cases they deem low priority. The Trump administration had barred judges from closing those kinds of cases and removing them from their dockets. The move could help ease the whopping backlog of 1.3 million immigration cases as U.S. officials prepare for the possibility of asylum seekers fleeing unrest in Cuba and Haiti. NBC News Justice correspondent Julia Ainsley joins us now with more on this decision. So, Julia, first of all, just simplify this for us. What does this reversal do for the judges, and what could it mean for asylum seekers?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people don't realize that immigration judges are not part of their own judicial branch. They actually fall under the executive branch, and they have to answer to the attorney general. So what Garland is doing now is undoing what his predecessors, Sessions and Barr, did by saying that now judges can close their own cases. It seems like a simple thing. A lot of other judges can do this, that when they see a case that is frivolous or doesn't meet their priorities, and they are trying to prioritize which cases they see first, they can actually close a case. That means they pause it. They don't cancel it forever. It doesn't mean the person has a right to stay in the United States forever, but often it can mean, okay, now you have time to get more details together. You can apply for a visa. It just means the court will not see you right now. And then it allows these judges to have some control over who they're seeing in their courtroom and when, so that they have the authority to prioritize who gets heard first.
Now, the Biden Justice Department has reversed two other Trump-era immigration decisions, moves that have now expanded who can qualify for asylum. What does this tell us about the Biden administration's immigration priorities right now?
Yeah, that's right. This is the third move that Garland has made to undo what his predecessors did. Those other moves made it easier for victims of gang and domestic violence to claim asylum, because that was something that was put up as a bar, a prohibition under the previous administration. This tells us that the Biden administration is moving in the direction of trying to undo some of the past and make it easier for asylum seekers, especially those who really need to be heard first, to get their day in court. However, I will say there are still many critics of this administration saying that they're not doing enough soon enough to address the growing number of people, trying to get their cases heard in court, and also those who are still waiting at the border to simply come into the United States and make a claim in the first place.
And Julia, this latest decision comes at really a critical moment. We know DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas warned those fleeing Cuba and Haiti not to come to the U.S. by sea. Would these be considered, do we know, high priority cases if people do make it over?
Well, it seems that they wouldn't have their day in U.S. immigration court at all. If they are determined to have a legitimate asylum claim, they say that they would be resettled in third-party countries. That's because Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of DHS, wants to deter anyone to make that journey by sea. Of course, we have to point out that his own family did make that journey when they fled Cuba in the 60s. So quite a contradiction there, but they're trying to deter that kind of immigration right now, something that they've gotten immense blowback from immigration advocates about in recent days.
All right, Julia Ainsley, thank you so much.
Let's now take a look at what's making news around the world this morning with Matt Bodner. He joins us from Moscow. Hi, Matt. Good morning.
Savannah, good morning. Well, let's start things off in Hungary, where some bookstores are putting up signs in their entrances notifying customers that they are selling non-traditional content. Now, they're doing this in response to a law that went into force last week that bans depicting or promoting homosexuality or gender transition in content that kids can access. Now, of course, we are seeing critics there slam this law as stifling free speech and expression in the country. Moving on over now to Lebanon, where the prime minister designate has stepped down, citing differences, conflicts with that nation's presidents. This move is the latest escalation in an ongoing political crisis that has essentially left Lebanon without a government for the past 9 months. Now, this country is facing an unprecedented economic crisis, and this lack of leadership, this leadership crisis is certainly not helping that. Finally, ending in the UK, an England soccer player who has been the target of a lot of nasty online racist abuse following their loss on Sunday to Italy in the European Championship final has slammed social media companies for not doing enough to stop this kind of harassment and behavior on social media. He and several of his teammates have been facing it, and he says that they just don't want normal people to have to deal with this as well.
Oh, gosh, it's just heartbreaking. All right, Matt, thank you for all those big international headlines. See you in a bit. Coming up, inside the red tape-filled world of marijuana research and how one team is using something called a Canavan to get around federal drug restrictions. That's next. Dictionary.com has added more than 300 new words and definitions to its English language catalog. They're mostly centered around recent social justice movements, the COVID-19 pandemic, and pop culture. Just a few of the words include long COVID, along with long hauler, DEI, standing for diversity, equity, and inclusion, yeet, meaning an exclamation of enthusiasm, and snack, which describes an attractive person. You might have seen that last one used on social media to describe our own Steve Kornacki as Kornacki the Snacky. And you know we love him around here. All right, now 16 members of a white supremacist group in Florida stand accused of murder, kidnapping, and other crimes as part of a sweeping racketeering indictment. We get the details from NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams.
Federal prosecutors say these 16 men in Florida were part of a white supremacist gang. They called themselves the Unforgiven. Court documents say they illegally distributed guns and drugs and committed acts of violence, including murder and kidnapping. One was accused of assaulting protesters last year at an event called Peace Walk for Black Lives. Prosecutors say the gang members were required to get tattoos bearing a swastika, an iron cross, or SS bolts, all of those Nazi symbols. One of the group's goals, court documents say, was creating a front to resist and rebel against what they called, quote, constant and almost brutal victimization of whites in Florida state prisons. They're accused of providing contraband to members and associates in prison to earn more support and expand their influence. And investigators say members of the group were also intent on attacking a rival white supremacist group, the United Aryan Brotherhood. Court documents say members used corrupt law enforcement officers and corrupt state employees to gather information about pending investigations and prosecutions. These court documents say Unforgiven is a criminal organization, and the prosecutors have filed racketeering charges, the kind widely used in fighting organized crime groups. And as we sometimes see in these kinds of cases, the FBI says members of this group had nicknames like Pretty Boy, Shrek, Hammer, and the Duke. Joe, Savannah?
All right, Pete Williams, thank you so much. A new book on the final days of the Trump administration claims the Joint Chiefs chairman was worried about a possible coup by former President Trump and his allies. Now the former president is firing back. NBC News senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson takes a closer look.
Explosive new reporting describing the country's most senior military officer, comparing former President Trump's lies about election fraud to Nazi-era Germany. Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Mark Milley reportedly telling aides before the January 6th insurrection, "This is a Reichstag moment, the gospel of the Fuhrer." That's according to the new book by two Washington Post reporters, based on interviews with more than 140 people, with newly revealed details of fears from top military brass about how close the country was to chaos. Milley concerned about a coup. Quote, "They may try, but they're not going to bleeping succeed," he reportedly told his deputies. "You can't do this without the military," adding, "We're the guys with the guns." Mr. Trump, who's still dangling the prospect of a 2024 run, saying he never threatened a coup and, quote, "If I was going to do a coup, one of the last people I would want to do it with is General Mark Milley," slamming him as a better politician than a general. A spokesperson for Milley declining to comment. And another excerpt says White House attorneys were wondering, even on the day of January 6th, could Mr. Trump be charged with a crime for setting off that deadly riot? Savannah, Joe, back to you.
All right, Hallie Jackson, thank you so much. Now to our week-long series on the future of marijuana in America, red, white, and green. We've been bringing you a lot of this week. Federal law makes cannabis research difficult and risky, even in states where it's legal. NBC's Cynthia McFadden reports on some Colorado scientists who found an inventive way around that roadblock, driving what they call a Cannavan.
I am a nurse that works in a school.
Deb Kirk loves her work.
Okay, let's go.
And she loves her life here high in the hills of Golden, Colorado. At 58, she's climbed 53 of Colorado's 58 tallest peaks. But in 2007, she nearly lost her life when she fell off a cliff.
It's like, I have a horrible head injury.
Several surgeries later, she says she couldn't tolerate the opioid pain meds. Did they make you feel loopy?
Absolutely loopy. And it didn't seem like it really fixed the pain.
Her surgeon suggested she try weed.
I was like, well, if he's telling me.
Deb says at bedtime she takes a quarter of a gummy with a low dose, 1% of THC. That's what causes the high, combined with CBD, and says it's helped her get back on her feet and even cope with the anxiety of the pandemic. Despite the fact that more than half of the states have made medical marijuana legal, there is a stunning lack of scientific data about the appropriate dose, strength, and effectiveness of cannabis for particular ailments. Was it trial and error for you?
100%. Yeah.
And just step on in.
Alrighty.
Which is why she's happy to take part in one of a series of innovative studies being conducted at the University of Colorado, Boulder, on the effects of legal cannabis on anxiety and stress. It seems crazy that more than half the states have at this point made it legal in some way, and yet the scientific literature could really fill this notebook.
It's true. We feel the same way. There are risks, there are benefits. What are they?
But doing that research has been tough. Federal law categorizes marijuana as a Schedule I drug, like heroin. So university researchers can't buy pot, even in states where it's legal, and study it. The University of Colorado Boulder could lose all of its federal support for student aid, right?
Correct.
That's exactly right. But this team figured out a workaround. If cannabis couldn't be brought to the lab would go to the cannabis with a so-called Cannavan. They show us how it works. Before Deb takes her gummy, the team evaluates her.
You're very good.
An hour later, she returns for more testing.
We're really looking at the real world and how people use these products.
Results to come.
Come here, bring your bra.
But even in marijuana-friendly Colorado, Deb is still concerned about speaking out.
I was afraid of all the things that I want to get rid of. The judgment, the stigma, fear of what other people would think. So,
how many of the people you work with know that you, in fact, use marijuana?
I would say a handful.
And now, more.
And now more.
Cynthia McFadden, NBC News, Golden, Colorado.
Fascinating report there by our Cynthia McFadden. Thank you. Coming up, a lunar phenomenon known as the Wobble. Yeah, it's part of the moon's natural cycle, but with climate change, it could produce some very unnatural events here on Earth. We'll explain next. Welcome back. It's time for our favorite Friday segment. Good to know. This morning we've got an important sunscreen recall to tell you about and a way to save money while getting around. Plus, a new option for lovers of Popeye's chicken. Here's NBC News investigative and consumer correspondent Vicki Nguyen.
Good morning. We start with an important recall alert. Johnson & Johnson is voluntarily recalling 5 of its Neutrogena and Aveeno spray sunscreens. The company says low levels of benzene, a chemical that can cause cancer with repeated exposure, were found in some samples. The aerosol products were sold nationwide. J&J is urging people to stop using the sunscreens. You can contact the Johnson & Johnson Consumer Care Center to request a refund. Instagram is launching a security feature for people whose accounts have been hacked. The social media company unveiled its checklist. It includes reviewing your login activity, profile information, and updating your account recovery contact info to make sure your phone number or email is correct. Can you hear me now, spammers? Yeah, Verizon says its new neighborhood filter will block those annoying spam calls. You know, the ones that come from numbers with similar area codes, so you pick them up and then you realize it's no one you want to talk to. The company says this free feature will allow Verizon customers to send these spam calls directly to voicemail. Save a little money while getting around. Lyft announced it's bringing back shared rides. Starting Monday, Lyft will be launching a brand new shared ride experience in Philadelphia, Chicago, and Denver, with plans to expand to additional markets in the coming months. Good for the environment, too. Each shared ride will be limited to 2 riders, and masks are required. Uber says it will explore relaunching the Uber Pool option when, quote, the time is right. We're all about to be saying, I love that chicken. Popeyes, home of Louisiana's fried chicken, is adding nuggets to the menu. The company says bite-sized nuggets were modeled off of the restaurant's famous chicken sandwich. These nuggets will be available in restaurants by the end of this month. Cannot wait to try. Yes, please. For News Now, I'm Vicki Nguyen, and that's good to know.
It sure is, as I always say. Vicki, thank you so much. The moon's orbit is predicted to wobble in the next decade. Now, I know it's a funny term, but it essentially just means its path around the planet would change shape. It's a pretty regular thing happening about every 18.6 years. But a new study finds that global sea level rise could make that next shift catastrophic for some communities. The researchers paint a particularly ominous future for Florida. In St. Petersburg specifically, massive king tide flooding hits the city now 6 or 7 times a year. King tides are what come along with a full or new moon. While those floods 6 or 7 times a year could increase tenfold by the mid-2030s. Joining us now is Professor of Physics and Astronomy and author of A Quantum Life, Hakeem Oluseyi. Professor, thank you so much for joining us bright and early. I mean, this is scary, fascinating, but just walk us through this. So first, let's start off with that wobble. I said it's kind of a funny term, but explain why it happens. And I mentioned it's regular. So just tell us, what has happened in the past when the moon is wobbling.
Yes. So thank you for having me this morning. This is one of those cases where the actual scientific words to describe what the moon is doing are so unpleasant that they use the better word, wobble. And so we actually call it the nodal precession.
Yeah, no.
And the reason why I draw that distinction is because the moon actually does wobble in a different motion we call libration. You may have heard that the moon keeps the same side facing the Earth all the time. Well, that's true, but it also kind of rocks back and forth. So that's the motion or the wobble of the moon around its axis. What we're talking about here is the orbit of the moon. So if you look at the moon's orbit, it's tilted 5 degrees to what we call the plane of the Earth-Sun orbit. That also has a weird name. And it's because of this 5-degree tilt that the moon will go through the plane of the Earth-Sun, going up and then coming back down, right? And so where it goes, where it intersects that plane, those points move. They rotate around the Earth. And that has to do, is very similar to when Kids back in the day used to play with a spinning top, and it didn't just sit straight up and spin. It would do what we call precession. So it has to do with the gravity of the Earth, the moon, and the sun that causes the moon's orbit to precess. And that means that for half of that cycle, it's going to be lined up with the Earth and the sun, right? And so when you have the Earth and the sun lined up together, you have higher tides.
All right. And then, Hakeem, if you could just quickly tell us kind of why that affects tides, and then we'll get into the climate change aspect here. But we all know the moon affects tides, but tell us about this wobble and tides.
That's right. So where the node is where the moon is in the plane of the Earth's orbit with the sun. So, for example, when there is a new moon, we get a total solar eclipse when the moon happens to be at new moon and at a node. So in this case, those nodes, as that node drifts at certain points, it's going to line up such that it's going to be sort of a line between the moon, the Earth, and the sun. And that increases the differential effect of gravity on the Earth. And that's what tides are. They are the visible effect of gravitational influences from mainly the moon, but also the sun.
Right. Okay. So, and Professor, I know that you've got roots in places that are affected by climate change. In fact, you work at the Florida Institute of Technology. I just mentioned a minute ago what this study said about Florida. This study by Nature Climate Change, it finds that these normally regular king tides, because again, these do happen all the time, could be much higher and last much longer. Now, we know sea levels are rising. So tell us about the wobble's effect and kind of that relationship there, that climate change has had this impact on sea levels rising, and then this natural thing, the wobble, comes along, and what's going to potentially happen?
Well, the wobble has been happening all our lives already. And so what this means is that on an 18.6 year cycle, for half of it, you have higher than normal high tides. And then for the other half of it, you have lower than normal high tides. And so this is a natural thing. What's new here is the sea level rise. And so if you look at the combination of sea level rise with other factors, even weather can have a bigger effect than the tidal effect. But what happens now is that the tidal effect is very reliable. You know it's going to be there. The sea level rise is what it is, and it's getting worse. So now it's almost like you have a bowl of water where the water is already at the brim. Now you add this force of the moon, and it's going to spill over more often than it otherwise would.
All right, Professor, thank you for the science, space, astronomy, astrology lesson. We so appreciate it. We know it's so important. Yeah, exactly. All right, thank you so much.
Take care.
Time for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
Bertha Coombs is with us. Hey, Bertha.
Yeah, back to news here on Earth. Smartphone maker Xiaomi shipped more smartphones globally in the second quarter than Apple, overtaking the iPhone maker for the first time. A new report from analyst firm Cannabis shows that Xiaomi had a 17% share of global shipments compared to Apple's 14%, but Samsung is still number one at 19%. Xiaomi has benefited from Huawei's struggles after U.S. sanctions cut the Chinese company off from critical supplies, causing Huawei sales to plunge. Meantime, PayPal users can now buy $100,000 of Bitcoin and other digital assets per week if they want to. That's right. When you've got those big bucks, that's 5 times more than the previous limit of $20,000. And the company is actually scrapping its annual cap, which had been at about $50,000. Meanwhile, Bitcoin has lost about half of its value since the all-time high back in April of over $60,000. It's trading at around $31,000 right now. And an 18-year-old physics student, Oliver Damon, will join Amazon's Jeff Bezos on a space flight next week, along with Bezos' brother Mark and legendary space engineer Wally Funk. The group will fly to the edge of space on Blue Origin's New Shepard rocket, scheduled to launch on Tuesday. Damon would be the youngest person to fly to space, while Funk, at 82, is set to become the oldest person to become an astronaut. Can you imagine, so what'd you do on your summer vacation? Went to space with a billionaire.
You know what's the craziest part about this story to me, though? You know what I'm going to say.
The guy who double booked, what else do you have going on?
Yeah, he got a spot because the auction winner had scheduling conflicts. what are his plans?
Right. I feel like my calendar would be blocked out with space.
Yeah,
you know, for like a few days.
Before, after, for weeks.
You don't know. Maybe that person is expecting a child, and that's when they're supposed to be, or their spouse is supposed to be, something like that. That's kind of up there with going to space, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
Sure. Let's hope that's it then.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bertha.
Coming up, a robotics competition fronted by none other than the Black Eyed Peas' will.i.am.
He's helping students in Los Angeles put the pedal to the metal, so to speak, while investing in their future. That story's next.
Now, most people know him for being a successful musician, but will.i.am actually has a big love for robotics.
The Grammy winner is partnering with LA Unified, that's the public school district in Los Angeles, to expand the robotics program and help kids pick up valuable STEM skills. NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce has more.
Helicopters, police cars, quinceañera parties, mariachis, rancheros.
That's the soundtrack that underscored Grammy Award-winning artist will.i.am's early life in Boyle Heights, a working-class immigrant neighborhood east of downtown Los Angeles.
I love Boyle Heights. It was a beautiful struggle.
And now he's doing what he can to ensure the future sounds a little brighter.
When I had success with music, I came back to my neighborhood and built an after-school program to get kids on track to go to college and to send kids to college with a skill set to where they could fill jobs that are unfilled or create jobs. And you do that by equipping them with a STEM skill set: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
will.i.am's I Am Angel Foundation is transforming underperforming schools by offering tutoring, STEM classes, coding, and robotics clubs. Here, two teams face off at Roosevelt High School to put their own creations to the test.
It's great to see them compete. It's awesome to see them get to the championships. But it's even better to see them go off to college for engineering.
Before leaving office, former LA Unified School District Superintendent Austin Buettner wanted to help. He committed to adding 400 robotics clubs in local middle and high schools with populations that are traditionally underrepresented in science and engineering careers.
I think the best thing is they see themselves belonging. They see this is their future. They're part of it because unlike so many things that more affluent communities have, they don't live next door to someone who's an engineer. They may not have someone down the street who works for Apple. They may have a cell phone in their pocket. But it starts with that sense of community and the sense of belonging, that they're part of this conversation. This is part of their journey.
Over the past decade, will.i.am's foundation has served 1,400 students here in Boyle Heights. Soon, they'll be able to reach 12,000 across the city of Los Angeles. For will.i.am, investing in the innovators of tomorrow starts by inviting them into the arena today.
If we're not in the conversation and programming these algorithms and training the data, it all starts with a robotics program. So as we talk about equality and inclusion and equal rights to education, it starts with advanced skill sets. That's the beginning of the conversation.
That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now. Stick with us.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.